Okay, it's good to be back, everybody. This class is now going to be called the weekly roundup. I call it the weekly roundup because it's not going to just be Parsha, as we normally would, although it'll be heavily Parsha based, this week's Torah portion. But it's also anything going on in the week, significant that's coming up in the week, just to give a quick little insight and beyond. So, what I want to start with is the new month. We're in the month of Cheshvan, which is normally called Mar Cheshvan. Why Mar Cheshvan? Mar means bitter. The bitter month of Cheshvan, tradition calls it, because of two reasons, many reasons, but the two main reasons are it starts to get cold and bitter in the northern hemisphere. But spiritually speaking, it lacks holidays. There are no holidays in the month of Cheshvan, unless you're Chabad, and we're all Chabad, obviously. There's Chassidic holidays, and we'll talk about that. Most notably, on the 20th of Cheshvan, called Chaf Cheshvan, is the yard site of the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe and what's significant about him and his contribution and his continued effect upon the world. We will discuss as it comes up. But there are other things that happen in the month of Cheshvan. Most notably, the Mabul, the flood, began in the month of Cheshvan. On the 17th day of Cheshvan, today is the 5th day. On the 17th day began the flood, and it lasted 1 year. It rained 40 days and 40 nights, but the water didn't subside, and dry land didn't appear until 1 year later. But the animals did not leave the ark until the 27th. 25th or the 27th? 25th. 27th. It was on the 27th. First, God commanded Noah and his family to leave. He didn't want to leave because there was like a certain, as we spoke about Thursday night, there was a certain bliss. It was a foretaste of Mashiach, of when the Messiah will come, the future redemption will take place. It was felt in the teva, in the ark itself. The wolf lied with the lamb and didn't eat the lamb. That's one thing, but they were very safe and insular, protected in a bubble, and he didn't want to leave, but God commanded him to leave, and the animals left 10 days later. And that's why, since the Mabul, the flood, took place in Cheshvan, tradition tells us, if you look in the prophets, they call this month Bul. Why is it called Bul? Because to remind the Jewish people that this month is now a month of compassion, a month of Rachmim. For a long period of time following the flood, maybe 1,000 years or so, the Jewish people were nervous when it came to the month of Cheshvan, because this is the month of the Mabul. This is a month of destruction. Even though all we know according to Chassidus, it's a month of purification, but at the end of the day, things were destroyed. The whole world, basically, except for a select few, and the fish. So they were afraid. They were afraid of this month. Then what happened was it became clear to the Jewish people. I don't exactly know how it happened. I don't even think it's really clearly written down, but it became apparent that this month was not a month of destruction, but a month of compassion and rachamim, and a month of purity. So they changed it, and to remind us of that, they called it Bul. Now, Bul is missing a letter. If it has a letter before it, the letter Mem, it would be called Mabul, which is the flood. But they took away the Mem, representing the 40 days, and the Mem is corresponding to the number 40. So they took away the Mem to say that the flood, what happened. That was in the past. Drop the 40 days, 40 nights. Drop the Mem, and let's just call it Bul. They call it Bul, and in fact, when King Solomon built the temple, as it's recorded in the prophets, in Chronicles, Kings, it refers to the month in which King Solomon built the temple as Bul. That's how we know about Bul. That's what they called it in Babylonia, or not Babylonia. That's what they called it at that time. They called it Bul, and which I'd like to bring up another point, that King Solomon completed the first temple in this month, but it wasn't consecrated this month. They wouldn't allow, God didn't consecrate it this month. It's not exactly clear, but it certainly has something to do with the month being that Cheshvan is a time of destruction. It was the time of the flood. So we pushed it off until the month of Tevis, which is the next month. Even though that sort of contradicts what I just said, but nevertheless, it's not totally clear about the months and why they dropped the names in this, that. It's not clear even in tradition, but nevertheless, this is the month in which the first temple was completed, the construction was completed. And another notable episode which took place on the 11th of Cheshvan, the 11th day of the month, 6 days from now, Rachel Imenu, our matriarch, Rachel, passed away. And what's unique about Rachel is she's not buried in Maras Machpelah, the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, together with her husband, Yaakov. And Yitzchak is buried there, Isaac and Abraham and Sarah and Leah. And the head of Esav is buried there. When we get to Esav, we'll talk a little bit about that, why he has his head buried there. Yishmael is buried right outside. He was introduced in this week's Parsha. But Rachel is not, because she died on the way to back to where they were going to settle in Eretz Yisrael, and they buried her there. And they buried her there because Yaakov saw in the future that we would be exiled. The Jewish people will be exiled from the land of Israel, and they will pass by her, and she will cry and intercede on behalf of her children. She would go to God. She would leave her. It says that she would leave her cave, not her cave, her kever, her coffin, and go to God and demand that God have compassion and mercy for her children as they go into exile. God once said, the first time it happened, as it's recorded in Daniel, in one of the prophets, I don't remember, slipping my mind. God said, "Why should I have compassion upon them?" And she said, "Just like I had compassion for my sister, I was completely selfless when it came to my sister." That Yaakov, what's the story? Yaakov came to work for Lavan, her father, for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. And Rachel, when it came time for the 7 years, Rachel and Yaakov made up signs to know that it's really Rachel who's under the chuppah. Because Yaakov knew that Lavan was tricky and he was going to switch her out. Perhaps he might switch her out because Leah is the older one, but also he knew that if I get him to marry Leah, he's going to work another 7 years for me for free, and then I can give her Rachel. So they made up signs, and Rachel gave the signs to Leah, because Leah, it says that Leah's eyes were soft because she cried so often, because it said that she would have to marry Esau. It says, it was planned that she would marry Esau, and she didn't want to marry Esau. He was a really bad guy. So Rachel had compassion and gave the signs over to her sister, and Yaakov, under the chuppah, she performed those signs, whatever they were, some baseball signs, whatever. And and then the next morning, Yaakov looked up and said, "Oh my goodness, it's Leah." And he found out that Rachel had switched it out. Rachel set it up in a way that should happen like that, so she wouldn't be embarrassed, and she wouldn't have to marry Esau. So with that, God said, "Yes, that's truly selfless, and because of that, I will have compassion upon the Jewish people." So that's on the 11th of Cheshvan is her yard site. I remember when I was in Israel, I've been there a few times to Keber Rachel, as it's called. It's quite a site. It's in Bethlehem, in Beis Lechem, And you can go, I think, on Tuesdays. I think there's a bus on Tuesdays that take you there. But on the 11th, obviously, thousands of people go. And it's in Bethlehem, Beis Lechem, which is heavily controlled by, unfortunately, by the non-Jewish people that live there that are hostile. And there's a major entourage, and I remember the serious armor. You go in armored vehicles, and there's whatever. But I remember just sticking my head out in a place that I shouldn't. Like, it's all covered up, and you're not supposed. They can't see in. Yeah, the Arabs there can't see in, and we're not supposed to be able to see out. And I remember just sticking my head. I'm like, it's gonna happen. And I looked out, and there was nothing there. I don't know why but I don't know. Just a story that actually happened. But many people go there to Kever Rachel to ask for shidduchim, to find their mate, their soulmate, and to get married, and a lot of brachas. So that's coming. That's going to happen in 6 days. There's going to be a big party on their way to Beis Lechem, Bethlehem. Another something very notable is Zayin Cheshvan. Well, first of all, Vav Cheshvan is my son's birthday. That's tonight, so that's notable. But the next day is Zayin Cheshvan. Zayin Cheshvan is what's unique about Zayin Cheshvan. It's 2 weeks after Shmini Atzeres. Yeah, we had the holiday of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. 2 weeks after that is Zayin Cheshvan, 7th of Cheshvan. That is when the Jews in Eretz Yisrael that live in Israel begin to ask for rain. Why then? Because the furthest one had to travel from the temple. In temple times, all the Jews, and during Sukkot, all the Jews would go to, Jews and non-Jews. For Sukkot, would go to Jerusalem. There would be sacrifices for non-Jews, sacrifices for Jews for 7 days. And then there was Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres means on the 8th you shall gather, which was exclusive for the Jewish people. God said, I want a day just with my own children, my firstborn children. 2 weeks, and then people after that would begin to travel home. It took the furthest group who lived on the banks of the Euphrates 2 weeks. So once they were back traveling by foot, by donkey, after those 2 weeks, we begin to ask for rain. They would wait for everyone to get back to where they were, and they would begin to ask for rain. So if you live in Israel, the 7th of Cheshvan was when you begin to ask for rain. And that's still today. You do that. You ask, if you're in Israel, you ask for rain. What about the rest of us? We don't do it until December 5th or December 6th. We follow the solar calendar, and it is extremely complicated, complex. And I'm not going to tell you why, how we got to the 5th or the 6th, and that's only going to last until the year 2100. And then there's going to be a new day that we ask for it because it follows the solar calendar, and it has to do with Prince Gregory's Gregorian calendar. He messed up the calendar a couple times, and whatever. But why do we ask later? That's the main question. So the Jews of Babylonia, they would ask for rain 60 days later. Why would they ask 60 days after Shmini Atzeres? Why 60 days? Because in Babylonia, it's much lower than the land of Israel, just geographically, topographical lower. So rain would actually last there longer. It would be wet there longer throughout the year. Now, you don't want too much rain because that'll ruin the crops. So the Jews that lived in Babylonia would ask for rain 60 days later. That was a more proper time to ask for rain then. And we kept up that tradition. If you live outside the land of Israel, we keep doing that. Now, the obvious question is, well, why should Singapore doesn't need rain the same time as I do in Michigan, as my cousin does in Brazil? He lives in, they're moving into the summer now. And the answer that the Rebbe gives is because majority of the Jews live in the northern hemisphere. We keep up the tradition of on the 5th or the 6th, to remember that's what the Jews did in Babylonia. But everyone then the reason why everyone prays at the same time, even if you live in Australia or South America, South Africa, when it's going into the summer and you don't want rain, because majority of the Jews live in North America, the northern hemisphere, not North America, in the northern hemisphere, and we pray collectively. We pray for all Jews all over the world, meaning we all pray for each other. we don't pray just on the behalf of ourselves, but we pray on behalf of the entire Jewish people. And since the majority of the Jewish people live on the northern hemisphere, that's what we do. That's just a little interesting factoid that will come up a little bit more as we keep going. Okay, let's go into the Parsha. The Parsha is Lech Lecha, which takes place, which every day we have Avram. Abraham is in our Parsha, which is unique. Sometimes we have Parshas even with Moses is not mentioned. We have a whole Parsha where Moses is not mentioned. Yeah, Parsha's Tetzaveh. Doesn't even say his name one time. But in this week's Parsha, we live with Moses, we live with Abraham every single day. Now, Abraham was born in Mesopotamia, which is, it's unclear exactly where, or Kazdim maybe. We don't exactly know where he was, even like the Hebrew name for it, but definitely in Iraq. And he was born into a family of idol worshipers. He himself, at first, was an idol worshiper, which is quite significant. There's a significance to that. His father Terach was a general, the general of King Nimrod. Nimrod was a very intelligent person, but he was very egotistical, evil king, not very kind. Terach was his number one man. Terach was also he had a side hustle. He had an idol shop business. And as Abraham was growing up, it's kind of unclear why Abraham's family became idol worshippers. It's unclear whether Abraham's grandfather was an idol worshiper. Abraham came from Shem. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was not a good guy. He sodomized his father, or whatever. It's a whole story from last week. But Shem was believed in monotheism, and his lineage all believed in monotheism. And at some point, something went bad, off. And that could have just been with Terach, the father of Abraham. We're not exactly sure. But nevertheless, the world was familiar with one God and monotheism. Noah was even alive. He had a yeshiva. The yeshiva of Shem. Shem, his son, had a yeshiva at the time there. And eventually Abraham would, according to the Medrash, he learned there. When Abraham was young, he began to question the existence of pagans and idols. And really, he was supposed to be killed. They were stargazers, and they saw that Nimrod's stargazers, his advisors, saw that Nimrod would be brought down by the son of Terach. His God would destroy you. So they tried to kill him. And they thought he was killed. Even Terach wanted to kill him. But eventually there were 8 tests that people were amazed by, that he survived, the fiery furnace. There were other tests. And Abraham never saw God. God did not appear to Abraham. All these tests took place before Abraham was 75 years old. So for some say for 30 years, some say for 70 years, Abraham contemplated the existence of God and came to the conclusion that there is a God and there is no other God. There's only one God. He withstood those tests until he was 75, when God finally appeared to him and said, Lech Lecha. That's where our Parsha opens up. Lech Lecha ma'artzecha me'ladtecha me'beis avicha. He says, leave your house, your birthplace, and start traveling to Israel, because I'm going to make you into a great nation, Abraham. You have been unbelievable. You're my most cherished creation up until now. I will make you into I promise you, I will make you into a great nation, and you will have children, and wealth and knowledge, and you will spread monotheism, and everyone will believe in one God. That was what he said. Now, just to give a little Chassidus, Lech Lecha, which means translated as like go away, go out, meaning leave where you are. Lech Lecha literally means Lech, go, Lecha, to you. Go to yourself. It should have just said Lech. If you say someone, Lech, go. But what's Lech Lecha? Go to you? Doesn't make any sense. So the Chassidus behind it is Lech Lecha. God was telling him, okay, Moses, I'm ready to take you to Abraham. I'm ready to take you to another level. I want you to go, I'm going to teach you how to go to your essence. And this is a lesson for all generations. How do you reach the you, the true you, not the shell, not the body, the materialistic part, but there's a part of you that is one with everybody and one with all, and one with because it's one with myself, the godly soul inside of you. So Lech Lecha, how do you go to Lecha? How do you reach that place? Me'artzecha. The next word is Me'artzecha, which means your land. Go out of your land. But Artzecha shares the same words as Ratz, which means desires. Leave your desires, Abraham. You want to reach that inner part of you? The first step you need to do is leave your desires for things. Desires for anything materialistic, anything physical, anything, even spiritual pursuits. If you're doing it for your own gain, but not for me, which is a very high level, God is saying, do it for me, don't do it for yourself. That's the first step. Now, if you can't do that, Meiladatecha. Go the next, what is Meiladatecha? Translated as your birthplace. What's your birthplace? Your natural inclinations, those natural desires, not the things which are nurtured, but the things that are by nature. You got to try to break those habits. You break those habits, and then you'll be able to take it to the next step. And then if you can't do that, mi beis avicha, your father's house. God said, I want you to leave your land, your birthplace, your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. So what does it mean, your father's house? Leave your father's house. Av, in Kabbalah, Abba means chachma, wisdom, the way you understand things. A mother, is ima, according to Kabbalah, is bina. It's taking the way you understand it and making it more a part of you. Yeah, a man more lives in the world of chachma, ideas per se, but then the woman is able, according to Kabbalah, the woman is able to bring it down to make it more practical. It's called ima, it's called bina, understanding it on your terms. You need to leave the way you understand the world, the way you've looked at the world until now, the way you've looked at yourself, the way you've looked at everything, how you understand it. I'm going to fill you up with new thoughts, new ideas. Says the Torah, you start doing those steps. That's the path to which you can reach the Lecha, the you, the true you, the godly essence of you. So he begins to leave, and he has a wife, and her name is Sarai. Yeah, Abraham is not called Abraham by now. He's only called Avram without a hey, and Sarah is called Sarai. She has a yud, and she's the niece of Avram, his brother's daughter, and they leave together with Lot, who is a nephew of Avram, a first cousin of Sarai, and a nephew of Avram, and he's not a good guy. He is not a good guy whatsoever. The question is, why did he take him? So Kabbalah explains that Avram saw the kedusha found in everything. There's holiness found in everything. We've spoken about in the past the idea of what's called sitra achra, the other side, or klipa, a shell. That there are things in this world, everything in this world covers over godliness. Our body covers over our soul. We don't see our soul. We don't see the other person's soul, at least most of us, at least myself. I don't necessarily see your soul. Why? Because my soul looks through my fleshly eyes, and therefore it can only see things physical. Avram was able to see a tzaddik who comes from the world of Atzilut, the highest level of the world, the highest of the four worlds. He's able to see, or she as well, is able to see the soul of the person first, and then the physical part. Not just of the person, but of everything. The soul of it. There's a soul in everything. If anything exists, that means there's a soul. Even a rock has a soul. It's called domim. It's called silent. A rock is called silent because the soul does not express itself whatsoever. You don't see any expression of the soul. An animal, you see more of an expression of the soul than a plant, but not as much as a human. And a plant, you see it more than less than an animal, but more than a rock. And then you have what's called a rock, something inanimate, rock, salt, all these different things, these minerals, whatever they're called. Everything has a soul. So a tzaddik or a tzaddikis is able to see the sparks in there and extract those sparks. Avram was a tzaddik, and he saw that Lot had sparks of kedusha, sparks of these little kernels of kedusha that's found in it, and Avram was able to fan it. He was able to fan it and make it grow. When Mashiach comes, all of the, as we've spoken about in the past, all klipa will dissipate, all the shell, all the things that cover over will dissipate, but not so much dissipate as much as the truth of anything in this world. A lot of the things it says about this world in the Gemara, it says that the world is a mixture of good and evil. Everything in this world, once the sin of Adam and Eve happened, everything had a mixture of good and evil within it. That's why you might listen to a song that's not Jewish or not holy, but there's some truth in it. There's some holiness in it. Because these sparks of Kedusha fell, these sparks of holiness fell, and there's truth in everything. When Mashiach comes, people always say, oh, what's going to happen to, this nation or this person or this animal there? These things that are not kosher. The holiness will be fanned. We'll see the Kedusha in it, and we'll be able to fan it, and you'll see the true kernel, the kernel of truth that's in it. And that's what will be exposed. So Abraham already lived by that. Abraham was able to take the sparks of Lot. He saw that Lot had Kedusha, holiness to him. And who comes from Lot? Yeah, who comes from Lot? Two nations, Moab and Ammon. Who comes from Moab? Ruth and Naamah. Who are they? Who's Ruth and Naamah? Most significantly, Naamah is the wife of King Solomon, how apropos in this week's Parsha. And Ruth is the great-great-grandmother of King Solomon. And who comes from King Solomon? Who will come? Mashiach. Avram saw that Ruth and Naamah, she converted. I think Naamah also converted. There was that their spark of Kedusha within them became very revealed to the extent that it overpowered them, and their godly soul, they had a Jewish soul the entire time, became revealed, and Mashiach will ultimately come from them. So Avram saw the significance of Lot, and he saved him. You'll see in the upcoming Parshas to what extent he saved him. So Avram and Sarai and Lot, they start traveling down, and God says, I want you to start traveling to the land of Israel. And he begins to travel to the land of Israel, and God promises him, in the land of Israel, you're going to have everything. You're going to be holy. You're going to have the great nations will come from you. And what's the first thing that happens? A drought in the land of Israel. As soon as he gets to the land of Israel, all these promises, all this great stuff, God revealed to you and promised you all this. What's the first thing that happens? There's a drought, and he has to leave. Where did we find something similar? Much later on, 1,000 years later, by Moses. God promises Moses, go to the land of Israel, go to Egypt, speak to Pharaoh, tell my people, tell them that God wants them, the Jewish people, to go free, and they'll go free. So Moses is reluctant at first, but God says, I'm going to come with you. Don't worry. We're going to make it happen. So Moses goes down there. Okay, fine. I'll go there. I'll speak to Pharaoh. I kind of know him. And we'll get the Jewish people out, and we'll come out. Yeah, 2-3 day job. What happens? He goes down there. Pharaoh says, not only get out of here, but I'm going to make it twice as hard for everyone. And not only that, it's going to take 10 plagues. And Moses is like, what? God, what happened over here? You promised me that it would be like an easy job, and look what happened. And God said, yeah, it's something called a Yerida L'Tzorach Aliyah, which we've spoken about many times. Classic concept in Chassidus, fundamental, that before any great ascent takes place, there has to be a great descent. Now, according to the descent, the setback is the comeback. Yeah, you want to throw a baseball really far, you got to cock your hand really far back. A football really far, you want to climb a ladder, you got to take your foot off of a pedestal for a moment, and that will allow you to propel forward. On another way of looking at it also, in a less Hasidic way, but more of a Kabbalistic way, it says that whenever a person makes a resolution, what's called a hachlata, a resolution to do something, the Satan Yeah, there's a type of angel that comes to trip up the Jewish people. He's a prosecutor. He comes to mess it up, which almost immediately. I don't know about you, but whenever I make a resolution about something, even spiritually and something very noble, right away I'm tested with it. Oh, 100% of the time. It's crazy. We were just talking about it this morning with Rabbi Schneer. The idea, and that's significant. Why is that significant? Number one, you should overcome it, but that's how you know it's going to be very powerful, because there's going to be some sort of fundamental change taking place spiritually for you. Your life is going to be better for it. So klipa automatically comes and wants to attach itself to it and take over and cover it and take that energy. It sucks up that energy. It wants that powerful spiritual kedusha dika energy and uses it for itself. So you become confused and becomes like overpowered. Like, wait, what happened to all my inspiration? It just went away in like a moment. That's because things cover over it. Now it all takes place spiritually. It takes place in your mind. It takes place in your heart. It manifests itself in the physical world. Yeah, some sort of challenge will come up. But the job is to overcome it. That's how you know. That's why, let me just tell you another concept. When the Torah promises all these like great things, if you do this, you're going to have an abundance of wealth, and you'll have a beauty and health, and great things will happen to you. Chassidim know that's not the point. We don't care so much. Of course, we need money, we need food, but we're not stuck in that. We don't live for that. We live for the kedusha. We do a mitzvah because for the sake of a mitzvah, it connects ourselves to God. So why does the Torah stress, oh, if you do this, such great things will happen? It's to show you that the spiritual energy of it is so powerful. Look how it expresses itself physically. It expresses itself in physical abundance. It's just a sign to tell you that there's something incredible to take advantage of over here, spiritually. And we know everything in the physical world descends from the spiritual. So sometimes it manifests itself incredibly, abundant. So over here, God, what happened when Abraham goes in the land of Israel, which we will find out later, at that time the land of Canaan, what it was called, the kedusha was so great that fine, he had to go, he had to leave. It was a challenge, but he didn't give up his hope in God. He believed, okay, this is the next thing I have to do. So what happens? Abraham and Sarai travel down to Pharaoh, and okay, they do what they got to do, and they come out very wealthy because Pharaoh realizes that they're very special, and that was that. Now, I'm not going to dwell so much in that because I want to give another concept. Abraham was a stargazer. He was able to look at the sky, the stars, and tell his future, as many were at the time. The art has been lost, if you want to know. Yeah, if you read the horoscope, it's not like it used to be. I can tell you that one. Sarai and Avram at the time looked up at the stars and they saw that they weren't going to have children. And God said to him, at the age of 99, you're going to have a bris. I want you to have are you going to make a bris? I'm going to make a bris with you, a covenant, but a physical bris, a circumcision. And once you do that, you will know, I want to re-emphasize my promise to you that you're going to become a great nation. And you're going to have you'll have progeny, you're going to have children. And Abraham said to God, or Avram at the time said to God, I look up at the sky and I can't have children. And God said, that's true. As Avram, you won't have children, but you're going to have a new name, Avraham, with a hey. I'm adding the letter hey to your name, and you're a new person. That person will have a child. And then Abraham said, fine, but Sarai, what about my wife? It's not enough just for me. Maybe Avram can marry a new wife, as we will see what happens. He marries Hagar. But what about Sarai? What about her? And God said, she too will have her name changed, and she too will have a child. What's unique is Sarai, at the age of 100, well, no, she was younger than, no, I think she was older. She was 100. She might have been his niece, but they were very orthodox. The His niece was actually older than him. She didn't have a womb. And a miracle happened that she grew a womb. A womb was created inside of her. Once she changed her name to Sarah, she dropped the Yud, and she gained the Hey, and she became Sarai, and they're now new people. Now, I want to emphasize something over here, and it's very serious. A name in Judaism, when a person has a name, we take that very seriously. We don't change names whenever we want. And in fact, it says that a name is given when a parent gives a child a name. They have nevuah at the time. They're prophesizing of what name they should give their child. A name reflects the essence of the person. Changing the name could be detrimental to a person. It can be for good or for bad. So we very much stay away from changing names. You go to a lot of Kabbalists nowadays, these fake Kabbalists. You go to Israel, you pay a couple thousand shekels, and it'll tell you, okay, change your name to, whatever, Puch Nagul. It's a big deal. You can't do that. We don't do that. Now, when do we do that? If a person is very sick, usually we'll do it like this. If a person is very, very sick, we'll give him one of two names. Raphael, which means Raphael, God is a healer, Raphael, Raphael, or Raphael, and Chaim. Chaim means life. So sometimes you'll see people have like three names, and one of them will be Raphael or Chaim. There's a good chance that at some point in their life, they were very sick, maybe on their deathbed. So you give them this name, and it will change it's now a new channel through which God gives healing and blessing to your soul, which ultimately manifests throughout your body. So Avram and Sarah changed their names, and now they are new people with a new agenda. And God says, when Abraham's on his way back to Canaan, and it says that when he has the bris, he has the circumcision, God says, you shall do it for all the souls that you have made. Now, there's two things over here I want to say. Number one, the Torah was teaching us, what does it mean, souls that they made? Two things. One are the converts, the Torah says, the converts people that they converted into monotheism, as well as slaves and servants. Now, slaves back then in Jewish law are not like slaves you see on the Amistad or what like regular what you think of slaves. The fact that the Torah says that slaves have to have circumcision, which means they become holy, and there's a certain revealed holiness to them, and we don't mess around with holiness. We don't godliness. This is the godliness. It shows on a certain dignity that you have to have towards them, integrity. And slaves often wanted to remain slaves because their life was very good. Everything was taken care of. There are rules. You can't hit a slave. You can't. A slave just means a servant that has certain rules that perhaps they're working off a debt, or they live a life. Now, God doesn't really like slaves so much. We find that to be very often, especially Jews, to become slaves to another Jew is a big problem. Slave is just the term that's used. It's an eved, which means a worker, but it's a different level. They remain within the house. They have certain obligations beyond just a hired worker. A hired worker can quit whenever he wants. Okay, an eved can't just quit whenever he wants. He has to go free every 50 years or 7 years, but nevertheless, he has to. There's a certain level of dignity. It's you have to give up your pillow for a slave. If he doesn't have a pillow, you have to give him a pillow. There's a godliness to the eved, to the slave. So God was saying you have to treat everybody with a certain level of godliness, a certain level of dignity, godly dignity. Number one. But what is this other point that they made converts? What does it mean they made converts? When Abraham circumcised himself, a circumcision represents, spiritually speaking, the removal of coarseness. Yeah, it's a foreskin, but the foreskin represents coarseness, spiritually speaking, coarse. It covers over the holy part, the holy organ, a holy organ. So the removal of that brings on a certain sensitivity. And spiritually speaking, that means a sensitivity to godliness. What happened was when Avram circumcised himself, now Sarai didn't have to. Women don't have this because women are naturally more sensitive to godliness. That's written all over Kabbalah. They don't have that issue, or that they don't have to work so hard. That's why they don't have as many mitzvahs, because they don't need all of that effort to put in to get to the spiritual state where a man has to try to get to. When Abraham removed that foreskin, the Torah says that people became attracted to him. They sensed a certain they sensed the godliness in him. Yeah, just like a person walks into a room. There are certain people that walk into a room and the room lights up. They don't even have to say anything. They just walk. The way they walk in, the room changes. You feel it. Says when a tzaddik passes by you, you automatically become uplifted up. Yeah, a great life hack. You want to become greater. The best thing you should do, it says in the Torah very often, is surround yourself by people that are greater than you. The biggest life hack. You'll automatically change. It says when Avram, when he would travel through the world, wherever he went, people became attracted to him. And he ended up having them call out to God. Yeah, he didn't even have to, the Torah says, it doesn't say that he called out to God and then they called God. It said he actually when people were around him, they called out to God. Meaning he didn't necessarily he didn't really proselytize. People were around him and were like automatically drawn, what's the secret over here? And he said, oh, there's one God. And they automatically they themselves became a vehicle, a vessel for calling out to God, like little walking Abrahams and Sarah. That it says you have to become a person to the extent that if you're spiritually sensitive, you should stay away from those things which make you coarse, that desensitize you. What are things that desensitize you? It says the Tanya, indulgence in the physicality. A person that indulges a little bit too much, and it's each according to his level. Yeah, it says for one person it could be that no, I need to watch 8 hours of YouTube for me to become insensitive. For another person, it could be 1 moment of watching, National Geographic episode. You might like National Geographic. Was that? Why would that make you insensitive? That depends who you are. Maybe that's something that it's not necessarily directly about godliness, and it can desensitize you. However, for others, it might make them, when they become more attached to nature, and within nature, they become more spiritual. It depends on where you're holding. Just on that note, by the way, the tchelis, I think we spoke about it before. When learning Hilchas Tzitzis, the laws of Tzitzis, we right? I think we're all learning that, or we just finished that. We're on to mezuzah, right? Tuesdays. I have to look. But in the tzitzis, it says that you have to have the color blue. Yeah, these little tzitzis over here. One of them is the color blue. One of them should be dyed blue. Now we don't know. Most of us don't. Everybody pretty much agrees we don't know how to make that blue. But nevertheless, it was blue, and most opinions say it was the color of the sky, the blue and the color of the sky. Why blue? Why the color of the sky? Because the Torah says if you look up at the sky and you see blue, it arouses everyone to become closer to godliness. And I find that to be very true, by the way, even me personally. You just walk down the street and you look up at the sky and something blue, you look at the blue sky, it makes me more spiritually sensitive. Animals, by the way, what makes a human different than an animal? Animals can't look up at the sky, they never look up. They look down. So even though they might even walk on two, like an ape, whatever, but the head will never go up. The head either, unless they're looking in a tree, I guess perhaps, but they don't look up at the sky. But even spiritually speaking, it means they don't think beyond growth. They don't think beyond creativity. They don't think about godliness like the way a human can. Just interestingly enough. What more can I? So what happens? By the way, when they're down in Egypt, the daughter, the princess of Pharaoh, is so taken by Abraham and Sarah that she leaves royalty. She tells her father, I don't want to be part of royalty anymore. I want to be servants of Sarah. And she leaves and she gives up. She was a very righteous woman, Hagar. Her name was Hagar, righteous woman. And Sarah and Abraham couldn't have children for a very long time. And Sarah eventually said, okay, well, I will build up myself through my servant. So Sarah gives permission for Abraham to marry Hagar, and they have a child, and the child's name is Yishmael. And in the middle of the Torah, it says a description about him. No other time does it say, up until that point, does it describe somebody. But he gives a description and says he's a para Adam, a wild man. And it says his nation, the nation which will come forth from him, will also be wild. The Arab nation, who are those who say they come from Ishmael. The Torah describes them as para Adam, wild people. Now, Hagar eventually gets a little bit arrogant, and she says, well, look at me, I have the first child. My first child is from Abraham. And eventually, well, at the time he was Avram, right? God didn't give the commandment yet. And when Yishmael turns 13, God gives or 12, I should say. No, older than that. Even before that, Hagar starts to get very arrogant, and Abraham kicks her out. Sarah says, I want her kicked out. And Abraham was the embodiment of chesed, of kindness. And he says, no way, I can't kick her out. And Abraham goes to God and says, what should I do? And God says, listen to her, listen to Sarah, because her level of prophecy is greater than yours. You should kick her. If she says to do that, she's of greater spiritual stature than you, and listen to her. So one of the lessons is you should listen to your wife. And they kick her out. Now, eventually she comes back after Sarah passes away. 37 years later, she's going to pass away. And it says that Hagar, it says Keturah. Abraham marries a woman called Keturah. And Rashi explains that the Torah tells us Keturah is from the word Ketores, which means she was one who burnt incense. Ketores means incense. She was an incense burner, which means this woman was one that burnt incense for idolatry. And the Gemara tells us that it was actually Hagar. And the Torah was describing that when Hagar left and she got kicked out, she was so offended that she burnt incense to idolatry. She went back to idolatry. But the Torah says she didn't do it because she really was into idolatry. She wasn't. She did it to hurt Avraham. Yeah, and the Torah was teaching us that when people are hurt, they act in a way to hurt other people. They want to hurt the person back. They don't actually mean it. She was stuck. She was just trying to find a way to give him a jab because she was so, obviously, you can imagine. She was so hurt. She tried to find a way to hurt him. So, but she didn't really mean it. And in fact, she came back afterwards and as a person who gave up idolatry, and Abraham knew that. Abraham knew that she was just doing it what's the word I'm looking for? To hurt him, to make him feel bad. So to have rachmanis, you should have compassion upon people that if they hurt you, they're not trying to hurt you because they're hurt themselves. Yeah, hurt people hurt. So the circumcision, the Torah ends off with the circumcision. Yishmael gets a circumcision, and the word bris is a covenant, and there are different types of covenants. But what's the point of a covenant? The point of a covenant is to say that right now things are good. And let's promise to each other that no matter what happens in the future, we will hold by this covenant. That it could be there'll come a day when we're mad at each other and we don't want to be friends or we don't want to have a relationship. Nevertheless, we will continue to have the relationship. It says that, what else is a bris? It says about Shabbos. Shabbos is a bris, a covenant. It says 8 times when it talks about Shabbos in the Torah, it uses the word bris, and meaning that, so some people say, as long as the Jews keep Shabbos, the covenant will be there. But we know that tradition, Jews over the course of the centuries would say, more than the Jew has kept Shabbos, the Shabbos has kept the Jew. that when people leave Judaism, when I should say leave Judaism, people who grew up being observant of all the mitzvahs, and I've met many of these people, special neshamas or special souls, and they leave and they say, I don't want to do it anymore. If you ask them, what do you miss most about Judaism, or when the observant life, all of them have always said Shabbos. This is something about Shabbos that I can't let go. You just cannot replicate that in a restaurant on Friday night. You can't replicate that in a movie or going to Malta or any beautiful place in the world that you can think of, sunset, moonlight, this, wine, anything you want to try to do to make it special, and only go to a monastery. Just something about it. And that's why the bris, it's his way of keeping us close to him. And that's pretty much. Anybody have any questions? Sorry, I have the screen over here. I'm looking at the people. Anybody have any questions? All right. If you don't have any questions, obviously just text me. Tonight we will have nigunim. Yeah, we'll do some nigunim, Hasidic nigunim, a Hasidic song. And then tomorrow we will kick back up with halacha, Jewish law. All right, it's good to see everybody again. And I'll see you tonight. You will.